is my pleasure to introduce our next speakers.
My colleague from KPMG, Erik Berg. Erik is the head of digital risk and cybersecurity in BC and also has various national roles. And Victor Platt, head of security and privacy at Integrate.ai. Both Erik and Victor are going to talk about artificial intelligence and the future of privacy. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I'm going to take a page out of Justin's book, and before we get started, I just want to give a thanks to the BC Aware Organizing Committee. So if you are part of the organizing committee, please stand up. Let everyone see you. If you're a volunteer for BC Aware, everyone's standing up. And also, I think it's important to extend gratitude to if you've served as an ISACA chapter on the ISACA board or a president. I won't make you stand up, but I just want to say thank you. It's quite amazing what we have going on here in Vancouver. We have international reputable cybersecurity professionals coming in as keynote speakers. Kevin Mitnick a couple of years ago, Brian Krebs. This stuff doesn't happen by accident. Significant amount of time and dedication goes into it. It's a not-for-profit organization, and the level of quality of the conference and the speakers is absolutely amazing. So I want to give them a round of applause. KPMG is absolutely thrilled to be a sponsor and be able to support BC Aware. And one of the things that, as we start off our presentation, is we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and its interaction with privacy, the intersection. So in doing extensive research in the past, artificial intelligence, my extensive research was through Wikipedia. Artificial intelligence was coined by John McCarthy, and together there was a conference that occurred shortly thereafter, the Dartmouth Conference in the summer of 1956, which formally introduced AI as a formal topic. Various different universities, advanced education institutions started offering programs. And so AI is not new. What's different about it right now is a couple of things. One, the drastic emergence over the last decade of cloud computing. Two, drastically bringing down the cost of data storage and also data processing. And the cumulative emergence and the evolution of various different cognitive technologies, whether it's robotic process automation, natural language processing, deep neural networks, machine learning. They all have contributed to transitioning us from traditional robotic acting like humans to actually thinking about humans. So as far as AI, we all know and understand that it is increasing in adoption. So various different studies recently performed by KPMG has indicated that approximately 23% are planning on piloting an AI solution. 31% have already implemented some type of AI process within their business model. So we're roughly half of the people responding are either doing it or piloting it. And the other 47 have begun limited implementations for specific processes. So it is gaining confidence. And one of the things that we are constantly aware of, in especially everybody in this room, is that security, privacy, and IT assurance professionals are desperately needed to be a part of the equation and at the table. And I would argue are mandatory to be at the table to help build trust in the adoption of AI. So one of the things that we are also looking at is the money. Got to follow the money. Various different estimates are out there. Forbes estimates that AI adoption and deployment is going to be over a $200 billion industry. That to me seems conservative. And point being is that it's here to stay. And I would argue, and we can have conversations about it in, at the break, that AI is going to be the most influential piece of technology that will impact both citizens, society, and businesses as a whole over the coming decade. So that is why we chose the specific topic, because it links right in with the overall theme of this year's BC Aware Conference as far as cybersecurity and the decade ahead. So as before I get into this slide, I just want to talk briefly about kind of the human element of artificial intelligence. And I'm not sure if you recognized or knowingly knew the first time that you experienced or interacted with AI. But my experience was very profound. It happened a couple of years back when myself and my family went down and visited another family down in Washington State, and they had one of the first versions of Alexa. And the kids went in there and they were having a great time the entire weekend, playing different songs, getting Alexa to tell jokes, turning on the lights, everything. I thought it was pretty cool. But what was interesting was when we came back to our house and they walked through the door, the first thing out of my youngest kid's mouth was, "Alexa, turn on the lights." We didn't have anything. We didn't have any smart home technology. But what was really interesting, and he kept on asking Alexa to do things. Like, it didn't stop there. He started talking to the iPad. "Alexa, turn on the game." But what was interesting about it was, whether you're a child or an adult, once you experience something and it has a tangible benefit and value to you, you expect it. Right now, I have an older version of Sonos. Doesn't have voice recognition. I think it's a pain. And I never thought that, like, all I got to do is go to my smartphone and turn it on. But I want to be able to talk to things now because I've experienced it with other products. So, you know, the human psychology around AI is significant. And what was also interesting was thinking back on that story, even being in, you know, the field, I was a little bit oblivious as far as what were they using with that information that we were providing them. How are they using it? Fast forward a couple of years, it's top of mind of all the organizations and how we think about AI. So adoption is increasing, and also the number of risks and concerns are coming out. So in another survey, 60% of the respondents see regulatory constraints as a barrier to implementing AI. So that's what we're going to be doing right now, is we're going to be going to deep dive into the privacy aspects a little bit later on with Victor. 35% only have a high level of trust in their own organization's analytics. And reading deeper into that is 2 points. One is the algorithms that are deployed, and also the data integrity. And 92% question trustworthiness of data analytics and are worried about their impact. So everybody recognizes that there are risks and issues with responsibly deploying AI. Being good cybersecurity professionals and IT risk managers, we always think what could go wrong. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. We see fairly routinely different examples of AI gone awry. So where Amazon scrapped sexist AI tool. In here, I deleted it, but we're all friends here. There was a headline which I find hilarious. Twitter taught Microsoft chatbot to be a racist a-hole in less than a day. But there are significant implications, especially when you think about health and safety, AI deployed within a health environment and utility environment. Thousands face incorrect benefit cuts from automated fraud detection. So it can go wrong, and people recognize that it can go wrong. One of the challenges is that the level of skills and capabilities that you need to take a look at the AI problem and to be able to mitigate the risk is, I think, more complex than other traditional technology adoptions that we faced in the past. I mean, just think about implementing an ERP system. Yeah, there's lots of risks associated with that, but we kind of have a good handle on all the different moving parts. With AI, you need people with deep data analytics skill set, understanding of the data. You need security skill set, both on-premise, cloud, integration. You need privacy skill set, regulatory, legal skill set, governance, leadership. There's a bunch of moving parts. Tax implications, the ethics of AI. Who's an expert on ethics and AI? They're starting to come. So there's a lot of different things that can go wrong. Basically, they can be summarized into one of 4 categories that we look at. AI getting it wrong, so incorrect algorithm. AI getting out of control, bots getting out of control. And we've seen various different examples of that. Not being able to explain that AI got it right. So the explainability of the algorithm. If someone has been denied a loan, can you explain why? Also learning and relearning, as regulation changes. How can you unlearn what you've already known and relearn the new regulation changes? There's lots of different aspects. And finally, inadequate governance to prevent any of the 3 points previously. So what are we doing about it? So what was interesting is we were hosting one of the sector days yesterday, and someone told a story. Rob from Tech, if he's in the room, told a story that really resonated with me. He was at a conference, a bunch of Google and AWS analytics and data scientists, and he posed the question, who here has 100% confidence that they can control their AI platform? And evidently no one put their hand up. So that just reinforces the number of people and the number of skill sets that are required to have responsible adoption of AI. So there are various different control frameworks that are being deployed. Various different service providers and vendors are deploying AI-related control frameworks. But the point being is that, as we all know, with regulation, regulation lags the adoption and advancement of technology. And people are not waiting for legislation to come. Even though just as recently as 7 hours ago, the CEO of Google made a comment around there needs to be legislation around AI. And we know it's obviously coming, but organizations need to get out in front of it. So one of the things that we've developed is AI in control framework. The purpose of the topic is not to go into that in detail, but one of the things that I just want to talk about are key anchors of trust. Regardless of what framework or risk management framework you're deploying, there are key anchors of trust, including algorithm integrity, so that gets to non-biased algorithms, and also the underlying data architecture and data not being biased. Explainability of the algorithm. You need to be able to look inside and explain what is happening. Can't think of it as a black box anymore. Resiliency. This gets to availability of the AI platform. So heavy on security, heavy on disaster recovery planning, and privacy controls as well. And then finally, fairness, ethics and accountability. So there are so many ethical questions that we need to ask ourselves around as organizations responsibly deploy AI. So, as I mentioned, there are broad frameworks that are available and are being deployed and enhanced as we speak. What we wanted to dive a little bit deeper on is, regardless of whatever framework you have in place, this is not a new concept, but this holds more true than ever before, is the concept of privacy by design and security by design. You need to bake in the fundamentals as the algorithms, as the platforms are being deployed. It saves time, it saves money, and there's an evolving field of how does that work within an AI context. But I just want to quickly talk about privacy by design, the 7 principles. So these were principles that were unanimously approved by global data protection and privacy commissioners back in 2010. They still hold true right now. So, and a lot of these are synonymous with security as well. So be proactive, not reactive. Think about the entire control environment, building in controls up front and throughout the entire process. Privacy as a default setting. So no additional action required. This was a big hot topic at the CES 2020 technology conference, where a lot of the different technology companies were talking about not just the new features, but privacy. So there was a headline around the new hot topic at the conference was privacy, which was good. Privacy embedded into the design. We are going to be doing a deep dive into that with Victor shortly. Full functionality, so positive sum versus not zero sum. So you don't want to be adding something and taking away from something else. We want to be continually growing. End-to-end security. Many of us know about that important principle in our day-to-day work. Visibility and transparency. I already talked about that from an algorithm perspective. You need to be able to explain what it's doing. And respect for user privacy. Keep it user-centric. I'm actually seeing more technology companies deploying features and functionality to make it easier to understand what your privacy settings are. So with that said, that's kind of the macro review of AI and kind of the risks associated with it. We're going to be going now into a deeper dive into privacy and privacy by design. And please join me in welcoming Victor Platt up to the stage. Oh. As you can see, we're going to be doing a fireside chat. I did not know that this was an animated GIF. So, okay. So Victor is head of security and privacy at Integrate.ai. Rather than me talking about it, we wanted to hear from someone that is in the trenches day to day and dealing with these issues on the front lines. So thank you, Victor, for joining us. Can you please tell us a little bit about what Integrate.ai does and the importance of security and privacy as it relates to your mission and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Eric. It's my pleasure to be here today and to see some familiar faces in beautiful Vancouver. So at Integrate, our mission is to build a better future for people and businesses. Lofty, right? Before getting into what exactly that means, I kind of want to just paint a bit of a picture of the landscape in which we're operating and where we've seen opportunity for our business. Really, for the past 15 to 20 years, the technology industry has been dominated by a few key players who have massive amounts of personal information and use AI in a very sophisticated manner. As traditional businesses rush to catch up with the big tech giants, they are hungry for data. And their options to get it are increasingly problematic from a privacy perspective. From shady data brokerages to always listening IoT devices, as well as questionable value exchanges and consent regimes, the world of third-party data augmentation is pretty dark right now. I think a key proof point of this state of affairs is the Cambridge Analytica scandal of a few years ago, where data was collected without clear consent. It was shared in non-transparent ways, and then really used to manipulate people. Some analysts are calling this state of affairs almost a fundamentally new economic logic that the technology industry is working on, and they call it surveillance capitalism. So this is where Integrate comes in. We're building what we're calling the Trusted Signals Exchange, which is the world's first and largest consumer intelligence network, which enables companies to share cross-industry intelligence, leverage machine learning in a completely secure and private way.
Just so you know, I had to get Victor to explain that to me 3 different times before I started to wrap my head around it, because it's pretty interesting how that actually happens.
Well, hopefully I do a better job today. So maybe make it a bit real with using a use case. So right now our primary use case is essentially providing real-time recommendations to our customers on how to better serve their consumers as they're shopping on their websites. Basically, a customer will send us a data frame of de-identified information about some consumer and ask us a question: what should I do now? And we provide back in real time a recommendation that takes one of 3 forms. The first one would be do nothing, this person's just looking around. The second one would be do nothing, this person's on a mission, they were always going to purchase some product or another. Or the third one is really, if you were to give this person a free upgrade, they would be more likely to buy because they love legroom when they're traveling. Now, what's different? Why is this unique from a security and privacy perspective? Instead of augmenting and buying a bunch of data and augmenting our customers' machine learning models with actual raw data, we create what we call signals, which are essentially mathematical representations of aggregated human behavior that we've derived from de-identified data sets of consumer data. We then take those signals and share those across the network to boost the performance of our customers' machine learning models. I think importantly, this all happens without having to share, mix, or purchase any other data or compromise consumer privacy. I would say this is kind of our core thesis. This privacy-first approach is better for people and better for businesses. And that's what I mean by building a better future for people and businesses.
Great. So, in that context, and looking at the specific security and privacy challenges with AI, the regulatory landscape with GDPR, what do you see the big challenges are for yourself and also for your consumers?
Yeah, certainly. So I think your kind of opening remarks did a good job covering the space. I'd like to dive a little bit deeper on the privacy side. I think about this in kind of 3 ways. AI is exacerbating existing, introducing new, and changing the nature of privacy risk. On the exacerbation side, there's just so much more data, more sensitive data, being used to make more consequential decisions in a probabilistic way, which changes how we need to think about the decision outcomes and that sort of thing. Obviously, lower kind of barriers to entry is having a lot more people, a lot more organizations, typically with less experience using AI, developing pretty sophisticated algorithms, and changing the unit of analysis that we as kind of risk professionals need to think about when we're doing threat modeling and risk assessment. And I think you touched on this a little bit too, is the regulatory landscape. So while I am all for kind of all of the kind of recent push for increased regulation with the GDPR, most recently the CCPA in California, as well as the impending PIPEDA refresh, the maturation process of us figuring that out and what stuff actually means is going to be painful. And we kind of live with that every day. I think a couple of the specific points that are particularly challenging are what, and this is pretty fundamental, what actually is personal information. We're thinking about new things like MAC addresses, IP addresses, in combination with other types of information. And mostly for us, we think a lot about how to create data that's de-identified, or what we call contextually anonymous. What is actually enough, and what does that get you from a legal and compliance perspective? And the last one is also equally fundamental, things like the right to be forgotten. What does that mean in the context of learned parameters within a machine learning model? And then we have a whole swath of kind of new risks. The way that I think about this, and I think we heard a little bit from Brian on this, is that good guys don't have the monopoly on the value of AI. We're seeing a lot of kind of new threats or augmented capabilities from attackers. Even something as simple as a phishing email. We've all gotten those. In order to create really convincing ones, it's hard. It takes a human to do that. Whereas what we're starting to see is attackers using AI and natural language processing to create much more convincing phishing emails at scale. So instead of spending 2 hours to be able to do some research, craft a targeted spear phishing email, now you can automate that process and send 10,000 out in that same span of time. We're also starting to see attackers using machine learning to bypass traditional controls like antivirus, as well as more sophisticated re-identification attacks, which raises the bar on what we have to think about when we're de-identifying or anonymizing data. I think the last one, and probably most interesting to kind of this group, is that it's changing the nature of how we need to think about risk. As I alluded to kind of previously, it's fundamentally changing the unit of analysis. So it's no longer adequate to think about just some data in some system with deterministic logic. We know the realm of the possible in terms of potential consequences. We just don't know that anymore, and we need to adapt our thinking to be able to account for those types of risks. A good example is we're now asking questions about the security and privacy properties of models themselves, as opposed to the data or the systems in which they're contained.
Perfect. So what are some of the best practices that organizations can use to assist with identifying and mitigating security privacy implications associated with AI? So, you know, if I'm a CIO or if I'm responsible for security or IT risk management, what should I be thinking about?
Yeah, certainly. So great question. I think I'm going to start with just saying, as we heard from Brian earlier, getting the basics of security and privacy right doesn't change. That needs to happen regardless, and you can't lose sight of that based on kind of thinking about the new, cool, sexy stuff. That being said, I'm going to talk about the new, cool, sexy stuff today. I also just want to kind of step back a little bit and say my perspective is very much based on being head of security and privacy at a B2B software company. So it may not always be relevant to everyone. I hope some of what I say is. But if you're not in a B2B SaaS context, you can then take what I say here, and this is what you should be asking your SaaS vendors. So hopefully it's useful regardless. This one's a little bit close to kind of my heart and my background, is really expanding how we think about threat modeling and risk assessment. We really need a new taxonomy to talk about machine learning and AI systems. And I'm going to enumerate a couple of the key factors or a baseline threat model that I think everyone can use to kind of better assess the real risks associated with AI systems. Typically, these systems have 5 key components. The first one being the test data, the training data. This is what the second piece is, the learning algorithm actually learns from. The third piece is the learned parameters. So this is what is actually being learned through applying the learning algorithm to the training data. Those learning parameters can have different security properties, different privacy properties, and then finally it's the test inputs and the test outputs. And all of that is wrapped in kind of what I call the interface or the attack surface. So whether your algorithm or your system is exposed to get queries like ours is, we run a prediction service, so there's inputs and outputs going out on a pretty frequent basis, or whether if it's just machine to machine, the properties and the risk and the attack surface changes based on that. There's actually a great talk at RSA a few years ago by a fellow named Ian Goodfellow, where I kind of adapted this threat model from, which I encourage everyone to watch that talk. It's very good. We also need to think and add a dimension to our thinking about threat modeling and risks around time. It's no longer, these systems aren't static. Their security and privacy properties change over time. I think a great example you brought up, Erik, is Microsoft Tay, who had certain properties when it first started, and then based on all the inputs that came in, those properties changed. And it had unintended, and which is kind of sad, unforeseen consequences in terms of being a...
And it can happen quickly. It can happen slowly over time, but it can also happen quickly based upon the real-time nature of the platforms.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of conducting risk assessments or building threat models for AI systems, I find a top-down approach is most effective, starting really by articulating who are the key stakeholders, what is the sensitivity of the data in the system, what are some of the desired use cases, contact surfaces, and outcomes. Once you have a clear understanding, I usually just draw a picture of it. Once you have a clear understanding of that, you can really kind of identify those abuse cases, so feeding Tay racist a-hole stuff. And then also really understand the consequences that are potentially there. And then you take that from a business view down, and you can work your way down the stack according to our kind of traditional methodologies for identifying and assessing risk. The second thing I wanted to talk about really is think about what data you actually need to be able to power or feed the machine learning models for your desired outcomes. Machine learning models do not actually do anything with static identifiers about people. So names, email addresses, phone numbers, they just don't use them. So you probably don't need them. And that's kind of the approach we take at Integrate, is we have 0 direct identifiers in any of our data sets. And we also think through, our models actually look at behavioral or transactional data. And that's what we focus on as opposed to stuff like direct identifiers, which make privacy risk much higher. I think the third piece is really around isolating your customer data in some logical way. It's often easier, and this is I think a remnant of the past, to create these massive data sets with all the rows and all the fields that you think you could ever need. But what that does is increases privacy risk, and it also creates a huge attack, a huge target for attackers to try to get into. It can also lead to regulatory issues. Certainly under the CCPA, there's very strict requirements about data isolation, whether you become a third party or in the business of selling data. And if you keep them isolated, you can have a better posture in terms of that. The other thing is new machine learning methods can help here. Things like federated learning, where you learn on local data sets and then you aggregate the results into overall models, which have the same or better performance as if you were to put all that data in one place and actually train your models on that. And I think finally, it's really about baking this stuff in, these concerns in, by design. Maybe a good segue to talk a bit about privacy by design, Erik.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I don't think I mentioned that Integrate.ai recently became the first AI native company in the world to actually achieve privacy by design certification. So privacy by design certification is actually relatively new. Can you take us through what was involved and lessons learned with your privacy by design journey?
Sure. Thanks for the shout out. We are definitely pretty proud of that achievement. And obviously grateful to our friends at KPMG for helping us through that. So first, the certification process was quite rigorous. We worked with your colleagues to kind of scope out the boundaries of our platform, what the specific data coming in and data flows going out were, and then assessed our people, process, and technology across all 7 principles, but also the 94 people that comprise the framework, which was good fun, and I'm sure lots of the folks here can relate to having to go through these types of things.
A little bit rigorous.
Yeah, which was good. And what we found certainly is that it made us think about things that we hadn't always thought about, and also validated some of our kind of foundational thinking. I'd like to say maybe 2 kind of higher level things about the certification and how we use it. First off, it's based on, the scope of the certification is a system. It's not some ephemeral sense of the organization's management system or kind of process end to end. It's really focused on providing assurance that the system, the AI system in question, has certain properties and upholds the highest kind of standards for security and privacy. So I think that's actually useful in a sense that organizations now have so many products. We probably all recognize that you can have the best processes in the world, but they just weren't applied to that one product that actually really matters, and which I think differentiates it from other certification regimes. And myself, I kind of sit with our engineers every day, and that resonates much more with the technical teams than something like another certification, which would look at governance and your management system.
Other broader perspective.
Yeah, and not that it doesn't cover that, but it's more focused on
Right.
the actual product, which I think is important, especially in a technology company. Over the longer term, and I think this is just kind of my final comments on this, is what we've really found most useful about this is using these 7 principles as a design heuristic. So I'm now in meetings where my product managers, my engineers, my data scientists are actually using these principles to actually think of and make design decisions. A great example is I was sitting in a design meeting a few weeks ago, and we were having some dispute, not a dispute, but
Healthy conversation.
healthy, yes, that's a great way to describe it, about some feature or some setting. And one of our product managers stepped back and said, okay, how can we be user-centric about this? And we basically, I didn't even have to say anything as the security and privacy guy, and once you have advocates in other parts of the business who are owning these decisions, I think that was a huge win, and shows the power of certainly the 7 principles. So.
Perfect. We have other questions, but I think that we gotta wrap it up. And just to finalize our closing remarks, I feel, and others, that we are at a tipping point with the adoption of AI. It's just going to become synonymous with many different things that we do. Trust is a big component of responsibly adopting AI platforms within your organization, we have a critical role to play as security and privacy and assurance professionals. And I can't emphasize enough the whole concept around privacy by design and security by design within the context of deploying AI. It's not going to be an overnight success. We're going to learn over time, which as we adopt many different different technologies, we learn over time. But the closing comment is you need to have a strategy and a roadmap in place to achieve a trustworthy AI application across your enterprise. And I think that hopefully this discussion and other discussions later on today will help you with the different types of questions and things that you should be looking at in deploying AI within your organization. So I'm just going to stop there. And do we have a question in the back?
Can you please describe the difference between when you say visibility and transparency, keeping it open, versus privacy by default? What's the difference in your 7 principles?
Sure. So privacy by default is, I think, maybe a good analog would be to kind of fail safe or fail closed, whereas it's not something sometimes you have to opt into using MFA for some system. This would be more MFA by default, where it's not an opt-in. Maybe you can opt out depending on the degrees of freedom that you want. And then I think your visibility and transparency question is also quite a good one. The way that I think about that is visibility is making sure that you are able to observe the state of some properties, whereas transparency is you're making the state of those properties visible. So one's more active, one's more passive. That's a little bit of a theoretical answer, I guess. Is that helpful?
And also
Sort
the whole concept around explainability and reperformance
Yes.
of the algorithm itself.
For sure.
As well. So I'm not sure if Justin or Katie are in the room, but with that, we're a little bit over our time slot, but I'd like to thank you for your time, and we'd be happy to answer any questions out in the hallway. Yes, is that fair?